Hi, Ben.
Hey, how you doing?
Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you.
The wrong camera. There it is.
Yeah.
What's up? I know that Andrea will join as well. Hopefully some more people. Let's wait.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds good to me. Let's see here. I'm gonna my coworker Nicola, he's based off of Pacific time. So it's 8 a.m. for him. So
Right. Yeah.
unfortunately he can't attend. Well, he was gonna try to, but something came up.
And yourself, which time zone are you in?
So I'm in Central Time, so it's at least 10 a.m. for me, so it's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, what time is it over where you guys are?
5 p.m. right now in
Oh, wow. So
Central
it's
Europe.
already,
In UK, where Andrea is, it's 4 p.m. right, Andrea?
yeah, so it's already late for you guys, right?
Yeah, this is my last meeting for the day.
Okay.
It's hard to find a time slot that suits everyone.
Everyone, right? Yeah, definitely does.
Hello.
Hello,
Andrea.
Andrea. Nice to see you again.
See you. Hello, everyone.
Andrea, I heard that you were very good at karaoke.
Oh,
I wish I had been there for that.
Where did you hear that?
looking forward to the next time then. I missed it.
Yeah, they had a. It was nice. They had a live karaoke, so with like live band playing.
Hmm?
It's pretty cool.
Nice.
Well, should we get started, Andrea, I think, or what do you think?
Yes, just trying to share my my screen. Just give me a second. Hopefully you can see it now.
Yep.
Just put the link in the chat. Oh, it's already there. All right. Yeah, welcome everyone. Today is June the 14th. My name is Andrea Victory, and yeah, feel free to add yourself to the attendees list if you'd like to go. Just setting myself. So a couple of things I added in the agenda for today. Just briefly, some updates, links to the white paper, project announcements. We had a few articles in the news if you want to go and read them. So that's good coverage. And then the things that I had planned that I put in the agenda, but let you know if there are other things that you would like to discuss. I wanted to go through the roadmap review. So I updated the roadmap based on what we discussed in the community summit in Austin and virtually, and just wanted to go through it with everyone again to see if there is anything that is missing, anything that is redundant. And then I put a couple of discussions on the spec that we could have. One is the payload structure, triggered by an issue that created by Ben, so thanks for that. Then there was one issue about dependency updates that you created, Emil, and yeah, I'm not sure, I don't think it has been introduced to the group yet, so maybe it's an opportunity if you wanted to. Versioning strategies, and then I just put a link to some issues of PRs that needs attention and some review and stuff. So this, I'm not sure we can get through everything, but let's get started. Anything that people would like to see that is not in here, any change in all their priorities? Okay, take that as a no.
There has been this discussion on the Jenkins cloud events to CDEvents adoptions, let's say. I'm not sure if we should mention it here, but maybe it's more on the SIG meeting where we'll talk about that maybe. Yeah, I think we shouldn't have it here now.
You want to just say a couple of words about it, Emil?
No, we don't need to. I just thought out loud. Let's take it on the SIG meeting next time instead.
Okay, cool. Let me bring up the roadmap. Okay, hopefully this is readable. So the way this project works, it basically groups by area and it filters everything that is tagged with milestone v0.1. And there is an all tab as well. You can see all the issues, so also things that are not in v0.1. But yeah, so this is the list of things that we have today in the roadmap, starting from the cloud event binding side of things. We have like defined a schema for CDEvents body and cloud events. So this one is about defining how data should look like within the CDEvents payload, at least if we decide that we have a payload or in cases where we have a payload. So we need to have like a proper JSON schema that defines what it looks like. So this is assigned to me. I started looking into that. And the other one for the binding point of view is usage of the cloud event subject. So there is a PR. We already had some extensive discussions on that. Yeah, so that's part of the we need to finalize that basically as part of the initial release, I would say.
Can you give me a quick TLDR on what subject is? Is that just like any metadata, or what is that?
Yeah, the subject is basically what the event applies to. So we have event type that is like event type is something like cd.events.taskrun.started, and taskrun would be the subject in this case, and started would be the predicate. So it is the kind of the terminology that we are adopting, and yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I like that.
For the core spec, so we have expand the bucket spec documents. I think this was about going through the spec that we have today and make sure that we have a better description that we have today. So more details about what each field means, reference across different events where needed, examples, and this kind of. So this is a rather broad and generic, but I feel it's needed for the first release to do this kind of work. I'll just keep going. Feel free to stop me anytime if you have any question or comment. For the root spec document, there's some work to restructure the kind of root document. That would be the one that defines the part that is common to all the events. And this has been already mostly done. We have now the context with all the fields in there, in the vocabulary section, but there is still some work related to the subject that I mentioned earlier. Where is it? So that's the reason why this is not closed yet. So next one is capture our key use cases and design decision in the CDEvents private document. So I think the use cases are captured now. And thanks, Matthias, for setting up this page. So a couple of things that are left to do here. I think adding a link to the white paper and maybe host it on our CDEvents.dev. And then I would say that we should document that every time we do some change in the spec, we should add some corresponding text in the primer document, like to keep track of basically the design decision that we make. So we have on one side the spec, on the other side, like kind of track of the design decision. We are doing the spec like this because like we decide to keep the payload or not keep the payloads in the events because we have certain backward compatibility requirements or like this kind of content. But I would say, yeah, so we can document that practice and then close this issue, and then this will be like an ongoing work. So next one is clarify the usage of source. So yeah, so I think a lot of IDs are specific to sources of events. And this item was about like defining what a story should look like in terms of structure, and having some recommendation in the specification about how to express a source. If I want to say these events come from this platform or this cluster, is there like a recommended format that we can use for that? Yeah. So backward compatibility strategies, this I added. New, so many projects and systems already produce and consume cloud events. When a producer starts producing CDEvents, in addition to existing cloud events, not all consumers may be ready to consume CDEvents. So how we solve this? A couple of ideas: either send both events or send CDEvents that are backward compatible. And this links back to the points that you brought up, Ben. So can we send CDEvents that are still compatible with existing cloud events so that a consumer can still consume the events if nothing has happened, or if when a consumer is ready to consume CDEvents, then it can start benefiting from that part. So I think this is something that we need to define for 8.0.1. And the other new one is versioning strategies. Again, thank you, Ben, for bringing this up. Yeah, so what is our versioning schema and what kind of backward compatibility strategies we want to have, and how do we signal to consumers which versions of a specific event and a specific spec are we using. I added new this last two as well in the roadmap, DORA matrix proofs of concept. I think we discussed this during the summit, that we wanted to implement this as part of the v0.1, just to make sure that we have enough coverage in the spec to satisfy this use case. And the other thing that I added is having a component that is able to translate from GitHub to CDEvents. This is something that is probably going to be used in many POCs, and also Salvoy or Mauricio mentioned that we're probably quite close to have that available. So I tentatively assigned him to this, and I think it's something that would be good to maintain, at least in the beginning. Apart from that, SDKs Go, SDK Python. SDK Python is required for the DORA metrics. And we also have work done by Jalander on the SDK Java. I didn't include it in the 0.1 requirement. But yeah, we could included it in there as work is already started on it. I don't know what people think about it. Just didn't want to put too many things into like a strict requirement.
Was it so that, if I remember from Friday's summit meeting, that the Google guys working on metrics wanted to have Java API there, Java SDK, sorry? Or do I remember?
It was Python for the Google
It was
folks
Python, okay.
because the 4Keys project is in Python.
Okay,
Or this is Python. Yes.
that should be fine then. I'm thinking a bit, I mean, we're now aiming for the 0.1 version, which is of course very, very early beta or something. Do we need to have all these things in place really? I mean, things could of course change quite a lot, and they could be non-backward compatible changes towards the 0.2 and 0.3 and so on. For example, the bullet 9 there. Do we
Yeah.
Of course it's good to have it, but do we really need it for 0.1, or is it good to have? And maybe as well the versioning strategy. Of course, it makes sense, the versioning strategy, to have something in place for 0.1 since it's version. But
Yeah,
depends on
maybe
how big we see it, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely for like the early versions, like pre 1.0. I think it's fine to not have backwards compatibility strategies, but definitely think about it, because that's going to be really important for like big players like AWS, and Google and whatnot.
Yeah, of course. Maybe it's quite easy to just get something out there on this topic, but of course it can be revisited if we get second thoughts or whatever later. But sure, let's try to get something out of this at least.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think like a full discussion on this can maybe take longer, and maybe we don't need to block version 0.1 on this. Yeah, I can remove it then from the milestone, so we kind of reduce the scope, but keep in mind that this is a discussion that we want to have. Is that?
I don't know if we can somehow comment it that it might end up outside it, unless we find an, or maybe you can have a comment saying that we should at least have some statement on this for the 0.1, but it might not be the final one or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely thinking have like an initial like statement on 0.1 is a good, because that tells players that are maybe committing to an early version that you guys are thinking about it, right? So I think that's a really good idea. And then and then one caveat is like, we don't want to wait for a breaking change to happen and then start thinking about it, right? So we want to make sure that we are thinking about it.
Exactly.
Right. So I put a similar comment on the versioning strategies. Then I think when we do 0.1, we should at least be clear what 0.1 means. That if we expect like breaking changes, that we state it clearly, and that we have some path forward to avoid breaking changes in future and how we want to do things. Okay. Any other one that people feels that we don't necessarily need to have in 0.1, or that instead that it should be here and is missing?
One thing I'm thinking of, we haven't really made the effort to move things from the SIG-Events repo to this new CDEvents organization in GitHub. That's not a blocker at all for the 0.1, but we should, maybe I can write an issue here in this CDEvents repo as well to make sure we move the related, the vocabulary specific things from SIG-Events to here. But maybe nothing of it should be part of 0.1 yet. I mean, for example, the Java SDK is mentioned there in the CDEvents repo. Maybe there's a duplicate on the CDEvents as well.
I created an issue today on the CDEvents,
Okay.
the Java SDK.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not sure if he. Yeah, I started reviewing all the issues on the CDEvents and trying to highlight which are the ones that are specific to CDEvent. Sorry, on the SIG events, identify which are specific to CD events. Yeah. But yeah.
Out of curiosity, this is kind of like towards the bottom. It's more technical than anything else. How are you do you guys use a modeling language to generate the SDKs, or do you guys write this all by hand? Because I can definitely see it being a lot easier if you guys use something like Swagger or some sort of modeling language to actually have every SDK be generated, and then maybe adding an abstraction layer on top of it. I feel like that would save you guys a lot of time.
We have looked into this at least once. Matthias did some good work around this. I think me and Matthias discussed some platform, which I currently don't remember what it was called, but that was more or less designed to be able to generate these kind of libraries in multiple languages. I think for now we're going by hand, but we definitely have a goal to switch to something generated to keep everything in sync, so to say.
Perfect. All right, that's good to hear. Good to hear.
Yeah.
And also the documentation itself that we publish on the IO page there, or the CDEvents dev page as well. That should be a common source for all everything related to the protocol, I think, as much as feasible.
Yeah, and this is the reason why also we wanted to have like JSON schemas here for the payload. The hope was that kind of structured information would help us generate both SDKs and documentation where possible. But if you have any specific experience or knowledge, Ben, in that area that you would like to share, it's more than welcome, of course.
Yeah. So I would have to see like how the Java SDK is structured, but if you're mainly dealing with like API, I would just use a known modeling language like Swagger. There's a new one by AWS called Smithy. There's lots of these, right? So I don't know if we want to reinvent the wheel there, because what's great about these tools, right, is they are already supported in multiple languages. So like you don't have to write this JSON generator, right, for Go, for Java, right? Instead, you can just use Swagger and then immediately go to Java, import the Java library, and then have it generate. So that's one caveat that I think is beneficial rather than just using JSON.
So I think one issue that we probably will run into is that we are not building these SDKs from the ground up. They are always built on existing CloudEvents SDK. And I would doubt that any tool set for Swagger or Smithy would generate bindings to the CloudEvents SDK. But I mean, that might be a pretty small part that we can solve somehow. And we can still generate the bulk of it using some schema language like that.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would have to, like I said, I have little context into the Java SDKs, but if you want, I could talk with you because I have a lot of experience with SDKs. I have 4 to 5 years doing like AWS SDKs. So if you want, Eric, I can message you on Slack, and then we can kind of figure out like what a good idea is going forward.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Cool. Okay. The right tab. All right, anything else on the roadmap? I think the only other thing is that the current milestone is past due 4 months. Do we want to try and put some kind of tentative milestone here?
End of September, how does that sound? Would that be feasible?
Yeah, for my part, it should be doable. So with less work in new conference presentations, I should have more time to work with other things, I hope.
Cool. So did you say beginning or end of September?
I said end, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe the beginning sounds very stretched to me, but maybe that's feasible as well. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think the end of September makes is more.
We should, of course, announce it as well. So part of this preparation should be to prepare a blog post or announcement on the actual 0.1 release, I guess. That's something we need to do as well.
Okay.
Is it administration or documentation?
Okay. Okay. All right. Should move to the next topic then. All right, so the payload structure. So I wanted to have some discussion on this. So we had a PR that we already discussed last time. And we had some kind of initial agreement, how things might look like. And then there's some further discussion with Ben at CDCon. So I wanted to try and yeah, have this discussion all together and see if we can come to an agreement. So I put some comments on your issue, Ben. I don't know if you want to do maybe a short introduction with the rest of the group on this.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Sorry
yeah.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah,
I can do it.
No. It's no worries. So to kind of give a little bit of background on me, to kind of understand like where I'm coming from. So I currently work at Apple. So I've been there for about a year. But 6 years prior to that, I was at AWS. So I was on the SDKs and tools team, and then I moved to EKS, ECS, that whole area of containers. And one thing AWS is huge on, actually, all the cloud providers, so AWS, Azure, and GCP, is backwards compatibility. So what I noticed is this data field is nested, and unfortunately, if you want this standard to be accepted into someone like AWS, that's a huge breaking change. So that's a breaking change for customers and all internal people that use SDK or AWS services. So this, this format, this payload cannot change, right? So it needs to be an additive change for this to be accepted to those type of companies. So I brought up these issues to Andrea, and I kind of gave three alternate. Well, I gave two alternative approaches, but there's really three. One being headers, and Andrea already said that you guys have already thought about all of this and kind of measured the pros and cons. But one is headers, which is so I kind of outlined what that would look like. You would have this X cloud event, which that follows kind of like what HTML, like that whole spec is like. If it's from a third-party thing, you have this X, and then you have cloud events, and then you have dash like ID spec. So all the data would be stored in the headers. And what's great about that, the biggest pro there is that the payload is completely untouched. So for someone like Amazon, that's a huge win. Like they would be like, oh, you're not touching the payload. We don't have to change anything. We just have to take your SDK and we're good. That's a huge, like burden. That burden of labor is really, really small. So, yeah. So one thing that I didn't really like is, so HTML, in my opinion, has this spec of like how to do multiple values. So like there's this metadata field that I put in cloud events. And the spec I think is really hacky. So I didn't really like that too much. But like I said, so one of the cons that Andrea had brought up, and I agree with him, is like you don't want to add too many headers, right? So if you're continuing to add to this, maybe headers isn't the right solution, but I think it's definitely something worth looking at. And so the second approach is payload and then metadata as an additive feature. So I wrote this, quick, XML example here is that you have that WoW, payload there, and then you have this cloud events metadata, which contains all of those bucketed items that are important. So again, what's good about this approach is, the payload, the payload itself is not a breaking change. But the issue there is that, people will have to, like, for instance, if I'm looking at, like, if I'm a customer and I'm looking at metrics, I'm going to see this weird cloud events metadata now, like in the payload. And I'll be like, what is that? Especially like, for instance, like if, I'm an AWS customer and I'm looking into like CloudWatch logs, I'm going to see this weird cloud events metadata that might not even be what I wrote, right? It might be something that AWS has that's being funneled back up into cloud. That's solvable, but it might be a little weird. So that's one thing. But in my opinion, it might be one of the better of the solutions. And then the last approach is a hybrid approach where things like ID, spec version, type, I think could all be in the header. And then you have this metadata field on top of it. And I think the benefit there, you kind of get the best of both worlds. So you get, the least amount of changes in the payload, or at least, the additive section of the payload. You're adding just what is kind of necessary there, as well as things that that won't change too much, which is like, for instance, the version, right? That's never going to change, right? Just having that in a header, I think, makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that's kind of the three things. And then, like, I saw your comment, Andrea, about versioning. That's why I kind of kept it short here, because I was like, maybe I should put this in another issue. and yeah, so I wasn't able to go through your response just yet, because I woke up and then I was, oh, he responded. But yeah, if you want to give me what your thoughts were, maybe your TLDR on that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so let me see. So one thing that, I mean, in terms of cloud events, They support multiple modes, so they support multiple bindings. So HTTP, NKDD, NATS, and Kafka. But if you focus on the HTTP one, they support multiple modes there. And there's like the structure mode and the binary modes. And the structure mode is where basically everything that is part of Cloud Events and the payload, they are all going together in one single JSON that is sent in your basically HTTP payload. And the binary mode is that the content type is just text JSON or application JSON. So like the metadata part of the Cloud Event goes into HTTP headers, and everything else, the payload, which is transparent to Cloud Events, goes into the body as a payload. So in this, the later mode, the binary mode is kind of the default in the SDKs. And so that's what we have been using so far. And so that's something. The other thing is in terms of where we put the actual CDEvents part of side of things. So the current SDKs, they use the all event approach. Sorry, the all headers approach. Everything is in headers, but we were thinking of moving things, some of the things at least, into the payload, so that we could have more the metadata type of things, like you were mentioning, event ID, the source, subject ID, some of the things that are relevant also for filtering messages, for routing them, and so forth in the header, and then have the rest in the payload. And I tried to combine what we discussed last time with also your comments, and I came up with something like this. I would basically, we would have this Cloud Events headers. The content type is an application JSON, and there we could have the meta, which includes the specification version and the event timestamp. Then more details about the subject. So in this case, it's a task run. So we have the subject type, task run, the subject ID, and some more content. Like we want to know which task this is specific to, a URL to retrieve this task run, pipeline that is associated with this, and so forth. And then we could have extensions. This is for documented extensions, or payload, and this is just like the free-form nested data.
Yeah, that's the only issue, is like the payload can't be nested, right? Because that would be a breaking change on basically anyone that talks to anybody. Because now, right, if you're changing what that data looks like, especially the payload, if I'm trying to talk to a service that does not adhere to your standard, like, you know, and I shouldn't force them to adhere to your standard, right? Like now it's going to be it's not going to work at all, right? So like if I go to a third-party service and I'm like, hey, I'm going to send you this, and I don't want to have this if statement that's like, oh, it's if this service, don't use your SDK, like it'd be easier just to use the SDK and then just send my data, right? But now I have to kind of like pick and choose which services and know what form or what standards that they, that they adhere to. So if you're changing where that payload is located, one, it's a breaking change, and then requiring that knowledge of who supports what is going to be very, very difficult, I think. So
there may be some fundamental thing that is not clear here, because CDEvents is, in my opinion, not designed to be a transport for whatever data someone wants to send. Cloud Events would be more of a transport. CDEvents is a highly opinionated specification for exactly what data should be sent. And as such, is a pretty bad choice for sending whatever payload you were already sending. Then you should be using some other, like more of a transport specification. So for a service to say that it's CDEvents compliant, it cannot decide on its own what payload to send. It has to follow the CDEvents specification. Otherwise, compliancy doesn't really mean mean that much. So, and I definitely see, of course, that this would be a heavy burden for someone who is not sending CD events today to start sending CD events. But in my opinion, that is an expected burden that we will have.
That burden is impossible for a large company like AWS. They don't know like what who service B is talking to, right? And then service C, they don't know who, and then all the way to Z, they don't know who they're talking to. They all know how to adhere to the standard, and then this is kind of a domino effect. I don't think that's a good idea.
Because if we say that, okay, big companies are allowed to send whatever data they want, then CD events is not the standard, because everyone can say
I understand that, but the issue is you're not going to have everyone adhere to the standard at the same time. That's just impossible, right? But the fact that you guys are changing where the payload is located makes the adoption of this almost impossible, frankly. So the issue here now is, if service A wants to, start using CD events, they have to wait for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way to Z to start adhering to the standard. In a massive company like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, that's never going to happen. People, they all kind of work at their own pace, and adhering to a standard like that is going to be a huge effort. But instead, you could say, hey, listen, this is not a breaking change. You just use the SDK and just adds header, this payload's at the top level. And what that means is that all these companies now don't need to, upgrade at the same time, right? Or start using the standard at the same time. And no one's broken, right? Things continue to work. And then slowly you can kind of roll out everyone to use a standard. Oh, yeah. I saw you also had a question, Andrea.
No, thanks. I just wanted to add something on my side. I'm not sure what I pressed here. Slow down. Sorry. Sorry, I'm fighting with Zoom.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, so basically, I've been thinking about this, and in the POC that we built using tools like Captain and Tecton and Jenkins, and there we have pre-existing cloud events. And I was thinking, because in all those cases, we had the issue of like needing to translate into the CDEvents spec, but also taking some of the data that was in the original message and put it into the payload, so that we could have extra data that is not carried by the spec yet, so to make the POC work. And for these scenarios, having the ability of having all the CDEvents data available, but also the payload available in the same format that where it was before, it would have been beneficial as in terms of transition. I'm thinking also like the Captain project offered to donate some of their events, the application lifecycle events, to CDEvents. But for us to adopt them, it would mean that we would have to change them in a way that is kind of compliant with how CDEvents are structured. But that would break Captain, right? Because they would not be able to use these events anymore. So having a mode where we are able to still have the same payload as Captain has, but we also have the CDEvents information in, it would allow us to take that advantage of those events. And then it would give like Captain a transition period or time over time to start adding the CDEvents information natively into the software on their side, so that they can get the best of both worlds. So because of this, I was thinking maybe we could have two modes, like similar to what they have in the Cloud Events SDK, where they have like the binary mode and the structure mode. And then if you're having like a binary mode, everything, all the CDEvents information that we say must be there, we put it into HTTP headers, but we know that there are some limitations in just using the HTTP header. So ideally, we would like to have things in the payload as well. So then the other mode would be then to use the payload, and that could be used when the receiver and the sender are both ready to send CDEvents. So that's one idea I was having.
So the two modes. So I'm very familiar with this in a lot of SDKs. So
Right.
usually binary, what that mode is typically used for is for streaming, right? So that makes sense. You put everything in header, payload's unchanged, right? Because if you start changing what the payload looks like, that streaming service is going to break, right? So that makes total sense. But in my opinion, well, one, you're definitely going to need two modes because you're going to need to be able to support streaming as well as just regular REST HTTP protocols. But the modes, I think, still need to be, useful to like these bigger companies, right? Or useful to everyone, not just bigger companies, useful for everyone. And so, mode one still needs to have this payload at the top structure because most applications are using the REST protocol, REST or some form of it, right? And some platforms do use the streaming binary protocols, but those are things like, streaming, like Twitch and, all those. And that would be very, very useful, but it still needs to be backwards compatible in the sense that they can use it, right, with these other services that they might be talking to. So that, I think that's why they have two versions, and to add a little bit to that.
The thing is that I think what you propose to have like the two XML sitting one to each other at root level, I'm not sure that would work, because I mean in XML and I think in JSON as well, you need to have like a root. Well, in XML, to be valid XML, you need to have like a root element. Otherwise, an XML parser.
Sorry, the payload would be the root element, and this would be nested in that. So maybe this example isn't the best example of that. Like I just wrote a quick Grow program to do that, but like you would be adding to the payload is
right.
the
but
thing.
Then the problem is then you don't have like a common root element in the payload for CDEvents. And that's problematic, because then if you have to parse CDEvents, you don't know what the root element.
Well, it shouldn't matter what the root element is, right? When you parse, like all you're looking for is that cloud events metadata as a field, right? So in my opinion, you just have payload as this generic object, right? And then you have this cloud events like metadata as an actual type, right? So when you do unmarshalling or deserialization, it's still keeping the main payload fields, maybe like as a list of objects or map, string. But then this cloud events metadata is its own separate hard-coded, strongly typed thing, if you will.
Right. So if I look at this example, it would basically be the same as this one. The only thing is that whatever we put in payload here, it would go one level up.
Exactly. Right? Yes.
Yeah. So the only problem with that approach then is, you might run into naming conflict.
Yes, and that's why I suggested, like if you go back up, to put it under like a cloud events metadata and just put everything in there and then grab what you need.
Right. Yeah. I guess we could use one name that is CDEvents specific enough that is unlikely to generate conflicts. So in that case, we wouldn't use we wouldn't be restricted to having all in the HTTP headers. We would have something similar to what we were discussing until now. The main difference would be that all these would go within an extra layer with a unique name, and the payload we would allow for like a generic payload to go on root level. So that would be the approach here. Yeah, I don't know. It's
a massive change, you know. So
yeah, sorry.
So you know, I definitely want to have more discussions around this, but it definitely needs to change if you want the level of adoption. And that's my thing. Like I want to see this get into places like AWS and Azure and GCP. I want to see that happen. But in order to do that, you need to make sure that it's easy to roll out. It's easy to ensure that other customers that might be using these services aren't being broken by this new standard, right? So yeah.
So just from my understanding, looking at this example, would this be a response to some sort of HTTP request that I send?
Oh, this? I imagine this could be either a request or a response, either, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a request, then that would be something. But then, of course, it would have to be a request to something, presumably. Then that understands CDEvents. So in my sort of limited view, CDEvents would be more something for like a message bus or something like that, where you have like an event-driven architecture or something like that. It could, of course, be used in a command response type setup as well for something like this. Just make sure we keep the other use case in mind as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I get what you're saying, but like, in my opinion, you don't want to be just limited to like message busing, and for instance, you also don't want to there could be multiple layers before you reach the message bus, but you might want to start adhering to the standard like way early on, right? So you might have to send this request and go through all these other APIs just to do that. So and like I said, this is I've dealt with so many breaking changes at AWS, like breaking changes as in like it gets to my desk and I'm like, this is breaking change. You can't do that. That when I see things like this, I know immediately what Amazon and AWS and probably what Azure and GCP are probably going to say when they see the standard. So and this is why I brought it up to Andrea. So so if you want, I can highlight everything that we've also talked about in this GitHub issue, just so we have some, visibility, and then hopefully get more churn and have the community react to it more and see, what people are thinking. And then potentially I can maybe get a few people from AWS to actually look at this and maybe kind of help kind of see where I'm coming from, if that might be helpful.
Because another way to go about it, but I'm sure I'm missing something that is critically flawed with that alternative, is to have a separate channel for sending CDEvents. Then it wouldn't be a breaking change to anyone, because when they are ready to listen to CDEvents, they can go listen on the CDEvents channel. Whereas while they want to keep the backwards compatibility, they listen to the old channel instead with the old payloads. But I would be interested to hear like what are the drawbacks with such a solution.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a perfectly fine solution. But the only issue there is, again, like there might be several services down before you hit this message bus. So you have to expect everyone to have this channel, right? And then again with this channel, how many APIs are you going to duplicate just to now support CDEvents, right? So that makes your code base, I think, a lot more complicated and larger. And I think, to simplify that, all we need to do is just move this payload up one level, or up as in like, don't nest it. And that solves all those issues. Your code base remains the same. All you need remains the same for the most part. All you need to do is, adhere to or use this SDK, but, it's not breaking anyone. Service A to service, Lambda or Service Prime, right? They're not gonna ever have to worry about, did someone down the line not adhere to the standard, right? They know, if I get the CD or the CD event, I know that it's not going to break someone, that might be further down the line. And how do I know, what API channels to call now? It's like, now I have to go talk to all these services just to be like, hey, do you have a CDEvents channel? So I think that definitely, well, like I said, it's definitely a good solution. But like I said, I'm thinking at scale like AWS, where that's really hard. Those teams are very, very siloed. So now you have to go kind of like running around talking to all these people just to ensure that they support all these channels, which is quite difficult to do.
Yeah, and I guess that is a use case that we definitely haven't discussed, this use case where there are several layers of services that need to contribute to a single CD event being sent at some point, or not even sent, but being understood by someone. I think all of the use cases that we have talked about so far, it's pretty much that whatever service or application is performing something related to CD events, that immediately has the opportunity to send the event directly and doesn't need to go through anything else. So this is definitely a use case that we have not discussed.
Cool. Well, I'm glad I could at least bring it up.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting and definitely something to be considered.
I'm sitting there thinking that has there been some related discussions on the cloud events community? Has anyone heard about that? I guess because it would make sense to lift that to the cloud events level of things, right?
Yeah. So okay, so give me a little rundown. So I originally thought cloud events was CDEvents. Are they two? I'm guessing they're two different things from the Okay. So in that case,
an extension of, so to say, to cloud events, I could say.
Okay, perfect. So what I could do is I could copy this GitHub issue and move it over to them and say, hey, listen, these are, I've been talking with CDEvents. These are some of the issues that we've been talking about, and see how they address it. If you think that makes more sense.
I think it will make sense to get their input on the same subject. I think that would be interesting. Because I mean, currently we have a binding towards cloud events, but we could bind towards other types of envelopes or whatever, message, or even other kinds of interface protocols or whatever as well. But currently cloud events, we are dependent on cloud events right now, and our current binding is towards cloud events.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, in that case, I'll take this GitHub issue and I'll move it over to them. I'll link back to this GitHub issue actually, and just see what they say. And then, maybe next SIG meeting, we can, kind of like elaborate on it, because like I said, like this is a big enough change where I want to have the right discussions in place and take the necessary time to make sure we're making the best decision here. And I think that's a really good point. So I'll definitely do that after this meeting.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm not entirely sure what. How relevant. I mean, this discussion would be for the cloud events guys. To be honest, because they deal mostly with the envelope. So it's how you. Not really. So basically, cloud events is basically an abstraction layer that allows you to, if you're writing an application, you don't want to decide from the very start whether you're going to use HTTP or NATs or MQTT, or you don't want to be fixed on a specific transport layer. It basically gives you the abstraction to for the SDK to do that. So you say, okay, I'm going to send cloud events, and then you can configure your SDK to decide which specific protocol you want to use for actually sending the messages. While on the CDEvent side, we deal with the payload, so with the actual data that we are sending in the events. And that's where I think we hit this kind of issue. If there is extra data or extra payload that already exists that we want to send.
But wouldn't, I mean, the way I see this, it's basically, can we turn something that is not a cloud event into a cloud event? Because what the CD event thing would be is just to add some additional data to it. It's perhaps more the cloud event part that may be tricky, or at least that's part of the trickiness. So if the cloud events project has had some discussions like, okay, what is the process for turning an existing like REST response or REST request into a cloud event, or to also be a cloud event, then adding the data, the data payload, which is a rather small thing, I hope, would be, adding the CDEvents payload, I should say. The CDEvents data would be a rather small extension on that, just adding one more JSON object or XML object or whatever you want on to the payload. So yeah, in my view, there may have been some discussions in cloud events on just like, how do we turn something that already exists to also be a cloud event?
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt to get their input regardless, right? So
Sure.
you know, so I can definitely just reach out to them and be like, hey, I don't know if just wanted to get your guys' input, you know, and see what they say, and then you know, with that we can definitely iterate and see, you know, where we kind of sit, if that makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, makes sense. We are at time now, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's adjourn until next time.
Cool.
See
So
everyone.
yeah, real
Yeah.
quick. So it's
Yeah.
every 2 weeks, right? And then
Yes, so this meeting we have every 2 weeks,
Okay, cool,
2
cool.
weeks, and then like the alternate week we have like the SIG events meeting,
Mhm.
where it's more about like the SIG events that we describe more like we talk about more like admin things, organizational. We have presentation from different companies working with events or doing things around events, and you know, to collect use cases. And
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I'll be here 2 weeks from now. And then another thing I wanted to ask, I know it's already late for you guys, but would it be possible to move the time by an hour? If not, that's completely fine, but I just wanted to ask because one of my coworkers is unfortunately in the Pacific time zone, and that it's the SIG meeting starts at 8 a.m. and unfortunately that's, you know, it's you know, it's really early for him. But like I said, I don't want to, you know, say, oh, you know, move the time, you know, but like if that isn't an issue for everyone, then I would be, you know, I think that would make more sense for people that are, especially like, you know, like most of my teams in California. So that would be really, really helpful. But if not, I will just poke them at 8 a.m. and just say, hey, you need to attend this meeting. So either one, it works out. But
yeah, we could have
a
a discussion on it. I think for me, a
Okay.
later time would work if we also move the day to some other day, because I'm
Okay, cool,
unfortunately
cool.
busy on Tuesdays. But I think for Emil, it would be a bit too late to move it an hour.
Yeah, it's a bit too late, honestly, but and if we would move the day, then I mean, evening activities start at this time more or less.
Yeah.
Some weeks it could be problematic. So this is more or less the latest hour I could have it and still call it my working day.
Yeah. Okay. That's completely fair then.
We can of course discuss it. No problem. Depending on who should be able to participate on the meetings, because of course we want to have everyone on board that should be here. So we shouldn't rule out such ideas. It's good that you lift it. So far we have thought that this is the best time slot, but if we get more people from Pacific, sure, we should discuss it, I think.
Okay, perfect. That sounds great. And I already knew it was late for you, Emil. That's why I asked earlier. But I just figured, you know, just to see if you guys have discussed it. But yeah, but thank you. And it was great meeting everyone, by the way. And I'll definitely message you, Eric, because there's a few things I wanted to talk about the SDKs, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you as well, and we'll see you more in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, you guys have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.